Chapter 16. In or Out. Years ago, I served as an MC and worship leader for a large student gathering in Urbana, Illinois called PACE 86. It was one of the most powerful youth events I've ever participated in. Over the years, hundreds of people have expressed to me that God deeply impacted their lives at that event. Well-known author and pastor E.V. Hill served as one of the speakers. I stood backstage with Reverend Hill as a band performed the special music just before he spoke. And as I rehearsed in my mind what I would say to introduce him, I turned to ask a question and noticed he was fighting back tears. "Are you okay?" I asked, unsure if I should be interrupting him in the moment. Something clearly moved him. "Yes, I'm okay," he replied as he scanned the sea of young faces in the University of Illinois arena. He paused for a moment before he continued. "I get overwhelmed when I see this many young people gathered together. So many of them don't know how important they are to God and how important they are to the work God wants to do in this world." Reverend Hill paused again as he continued to look around the arena. "When I was their age, I didn't even think God knew who I was. I certainly didn't know that He had a plan for my life." He explained that as an African-American kid growing up in the South, he never had a vision for doing anything beyond surviving. I thought for a moment about how far he had come. And a few moments later, Reverend Hill stood on the platform and delivered one of the most powerful sermons I have ever heard. I'm pretty sure he didn't preach what he'd planned. I think God wanted to say something to thousands of youth that night, and He found His mouthpiece in E.V. Hill. As he began, Reverend Hill stood and again scanned the crowd in front of him, and the place remained still until he broke the silence. With his southern accent and slow, drawn-out cadence, he proclaimed, "God has a plan for you." He repeated the phrase, "God has a plan for you, and you, and you, and you," he said as he pointed at different young people in the audience. "It ain't your mama's plans. It ain't your daddy's plan." The crowd laughed, and some individuals actually looked relieved. "It's God's one and only plan for you," he said, and then paused again for dramatic effect. "And there ain't no plan B. You're it. You're it. You're it." I was mesmerized and deeply impacted by the powerful message he delivered that night. I never forgot his frequent use of the phrase, "There ain't no plan B." Subsequently, I found myself deducing, that's it. There is a plan A. We need to recover, rediscover, rekindle revive, restore the one and only original plan, the one Jesus modeled. Because it's not a plan. It's the plan. The God-designed plan He has for each one of us should be called Plan A. Reverend Hill ended the message by inviting everyone in the audience to respond to God's plan for them. And thousands came forward that night to say, "I'm in." Don't buy into the lie. Hopefully, by now, you've decided that you're all in too. If you are, then be aware. Your enemy, Satan, wants to get you back out. If you aren't committed to being all in, it may be the result of Satan working hard to keep you out. When you commit to being all in for God's purposes in your life, you become a threat to Satan. He knows that as you remain in the vine, you bear much fruit. And He knows that as you allow God to lead and empower you in the moment and along the way, you expand the boundaries of God's kingdom on earth. Expect Satan to fight against the daily activation of God's Plan A in your life. He wants to prevent you from being all in. Not only does God have a plan for your life, but Satan does too. He wants you stuck on the sidelines, uninvolved in kingdom service, and he'll do whatever he can to discourage you or recycle you so you return to inactive status. He'll even try to convince you that you're doing God a favor by staying out of the race. His plans for your life include disqualifying yourself because you aren't a good enough Christian. He even wants you thinking that qualified people exist. You just aren't one of them. Satan is a deceiver, and he knows how to play with your mind. He knows how to discourage you with thoughts about your life that run counter to God's. He tries to sow seeds of doubt in your mind so you prohibit yourself from living out God's purposes. If he can get you to disqualify yourself, he knows you'll remain in spectator mode. Here are some of the lies Satan uses to keep you missing in action. Lie number 1, I'm not perfect enough. Think for a moment, how many people do you know who are perfect? I'm not referring to people who think they're perfect. How many truly perfect people do you know? None, of course. There are no perfect people. Of course, you already know this. You probably offer this morsel of truth to comfort others when they make mistakes, yet if you're like many people, you hesitate and disqualify yourself from God's Plan A kingdom service because of your repeated battles with frailty and imperfection. You convince yourself that God has laborers at his disposal much less flawed than you. Not true. But you've pressed rewind and you've re-listened to this lie so many times that you don't even realize how much it affects you. I'm not good enough or perfect enough for God to really use me. You rehearse to yourself. But with the utmost confidence, I promise that this self-imposed verdict contradicts God's verdict for your life. And how do I know? Because God is always included greatly flawed people in his plan. In fact, they're the only people he works with. The great heroes of the Bible were as flawed as you and me. Reread your favorite passages about Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Jacob, Moses, Rahab, Gideon, David, the disciples, and others. Only this time, notice how God used them despite their major flaws. God doesn't have a plan B. Imperfect people are the key to his plan. Your imperfections in no way diminish his desire to use you. Since the beginning of time, God has had only one perfect person at his disposal through whom he could work, Jesus. Otherwise, for thousands of years, he's used imperfect earthen vessels to show his all-surpassing power. We need to stop waiting for some undetermined day in the future when we foolishly think we'll be closer to perfect or better than we are now before we accept God's Plan A assignments for our lives. By the time you are perfect, when you see God face to face in heaven and you're changed into his likeness, you'll be of no more earthly value to him. By that point, you've already missed your opportunity to be God's Plan A. Just do what John the Baptist did. He didn't claim to be perfect, but he called attention to the one who is. He pointed people to Jesus and said, "Look, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. I've seen and I testify that this is the Son of God." You don't need to be perfect to be a pointer. You just need to be willing to redirect the focus off of yourself and onto him, like John the Baptist. And when you get over yourself and raise your gaze toward him, others will too. Lie number 2, I'm not worthy. We rarely say this, but many of us feel it. The enemy has ingrained the "I'm not worthy" lie so deeply into our minds that many of us actually start believing we're doing the right thing by not getting involved in ministry service. We're simply not worthy enough to take part in something so important. We feel unworthy because we've done something bad or something bad has been done to us. As a result, we feel like damaged goods. We fail to see our own value, and we can't imagine that God sees it either. But the Bible clearly tells us that we mean the world to him. For God so loved the world that he sent Jesus to save us. In fact, our worth hasn't changed since the day we were born. Regardless of what we've done or what's been done to us, we still hold great value to God. When I speak at Plan A conferences, I often pull out a crisp $20 bill, hold it up, and ask if anyone wants it. Every time, a number of hands shoot up in the air. They're thinking, who wouldn't want a $20 bill? Wait a minute, I say to them as I crumple up the bill in my hand until it's in a tight little ball. And then I hold up the little ball and ask, now who wants it? Even more hands shoot up into the air. Okay, wait a minute. Wait another minute, I say to them as I drop the bill and grind it into the dirty floor with my shoe. I reach down, pick it up, and raise it back into the air. It's now a very wrinkled, very dirty $20 bill. Now who wants it? I ask. And without exception, even more hands go up. Some even start shouting, "I want it!" Why would so many people want a wrinkled, soiled $20 bill? Because it hasn't lost its value. And neither have you. Regardless of your past or present, your great value to God remains the same. I bet he's even shouting, "I want you!" So deal a final death blow to Satan's repetitious lie that you're not worthy. Liberate yourself from the chains of this lie by emphatically declaring, "I don't do this because I'm worthy. I do this because he's worthy." Lie number 3. I don't know enough. Interesting, isn't it, that 11 of the 12 people Jesus recruited to launch the most important movement in human history were uneducated, ordinary men? And the one educated man betrayed him? The world impact of these 11 men is irrefutable. Yet not a single record exists of any college diplomas, seminary degrees, or doctorates among them. Jesus doesn't require any special degrees or knowledge of you either. Rather than focusing on what you don't know, focus on what you do know. You have something far better than second-hand information. You have first-hand experience. God has given you a compelling story of what he's done in your life. And your story validates that just like he did in the past, God still shows up in people's lives today. In fact, you undoubtedly possess a whole personal library of God stories, moments when God has shown up in your life. We always need to learn more about God and his word, and we need to share it. But his word made flesh in your life, your personal stories, will powerfully impact people and may be just the next step they need. During the long hours of cross-country road trips in our family car, we often play the alphabet game. It can take a while to find every letter and eventually arrive at the final winning letter, Z. Yet you need and appreciate every letter you find along the way. People on a spiritual discovery journey may need the next letter you have to offer them. It may be a word spoken, an act of kindness, a spirit-prompted thought you share, or an action God leads you to take. Whatever God's Spirit prompts you to do or say, trust in him. However small it seems to you, it may be just the right next letter needed in their spiritual search. Forcing yourself or others into pushy or contrived A to Z conversations because you think that's what you should do actually may be insensitive overload for them, and an expression of low personal trust in the voice of God's Spirit. God needs you to be willing to be simply his timely delivery of the next letter, helping someone get one more letter further along in their discovery of God's love and plans for them. A seasoned New Zealand missionary told me, when a soccer game is won, everyone celebrates the ball's arrival in the goal. But there were a whole lot of feet kicking the ball in the right direction all the way down the field. It takes all the players moving the ball forward a little or a lot, all the way to the goal. At just the right moment, one player enjoys the privilege of putting the ball in the back of the net. It took a team. So just because some people may know more about God or ministry than you, it doesn't disqualify you from offering and using what you already know to help others get further along toward the goal God has for them. Years ago, the 19th century itinerant evangelist D.L. Moody appeared at an Oxford University chapel service. Not long after he started preaching, his poor grammar began annoying the students. Didn't he know better? Every time he made a grammatical error, the students stomped their feet on the floor. Some say that the chapel service featured more stomping than preaching. And afterward, a student approached Moody and offered to give him a list of all the grammatical mistakes he made that night. Although Moody could have apologized or reacted with embarrassment, he refused to allow his lack of formal education to discourage him. Instead, he replied to the student, "I'm using all the grammar I know to the glory of God. Are you using all the grammar you know to the glory of God?" Moody's question applies to us as well. Rather than ask yourself, how much do I know about God? Ask yourself, am I using what I know about God for His glory and for the good of others? God doesn't call us to be information brokers. He calls us to love Him with everything that's within us. And then love people. More than knowledge, love changes lives. And anyone can love. Your competence comes from God. And He always leads you in triumphal procession in Christ, and through you spreads everywhere the fragrance of the knowledge of Him. 2 Corinthians 2:14. So get over what you don't know and give people the delightful aroma of Jesus. Get in. Charles Blondin, the great 19th century tightrope artist, used to draw crowds by crossing the Niagara River just downstream from the falls. He enjoyed terrifying the onlookers with his theatrics, and sometimes he crossed the river blindfolded. Other times he crossed on stilts or with a man on his back. One time, he stood before the crowd and asked if they believed he could roll a wheelbarrow on the tightrope to the other side. A man anxious to see the feat shouted, "Yes, I believe you can." And the great Blondin smiled, rolled the wheelbarrow to the tightrope, and then looked directly at the man. "If you believe I can, then get in." At some point in our lives, God asks us to step out in faith and get in the wheelbarrow. It's one thing to say to God, "Yes, I believe you can." But it's completely different to stop listening to Satan's lies and climb in the wheelbarrow, placing your trust and your life in God's hands. Living as a Plan A kingdom laborer requires that you continually take new steps of faith. Sometimes God may ask you to venture outside of your comfort zone, way outside. Sometimes He may want you to alter little things in the course of an ordinary day. Other times, He may ask you to do what seems impossible. If you're unwilling to trust Him, you'll likely drift back to the sidelines where it's safe and comfortable, and you'll never experience the incredible joy that awaits those who get in. In Genesis 12, God told Abraham to leave behind his safe life, his country, people, and his father's household, and embrace the uncertainty of an unknown journey ahead. And Abram obeyed. He didn't know where God was leading him, but he left anyhow. God called him to get in, and he did. Ripples from his "I'm in" decision went farther than he could ever have imagined. Living a Plan A life at times may require that you exchange personal safety, security, and comfort for a moment or a lifetime of uncertainty. It requires that you go somewhere, do something, or give something that seems illogical or impractical from a human standpoint. It requires that you get in, just like it did Abram. Countless men and women of faith before you have overcome their fears, frailties, and mental roadblocks to take part in God's plan. Now it's your turn. It's time to get in, all in.